You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin.
The first time I tried the door, I thought it was just stuck. The second time, I started to worry. By the third time, as the reality of our situation sank in, I knew we were trapped. What had begun as a simple overnight stay at a rundown motel had turned into a claustrophobic nightmare, and I had no idea if we'd make it out alive. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I had been driving for hours. We were on our way to her sister's wedding, cutting through back roads to avoid highway traffic. It was Sarah's idea, a chance to see some of the country's hidden gems, she'd said. Now, as our eyes strained against the darkness and fatigue set in, I was beginning to regret agreeing to her plan. "We should stop for the night," Sarah said, stifling a yawn. "We're both exhausted." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Next place we see, we'll pull over." That place turned out to be the Pine Grove Motel, a dilapidated establishment that had clearly seen better days. The neon sign flickered weakly, half the letters burnt out. But it was late. We were tired, and neither of us fancied driving any further. The man at the front desk looked like he'd been there since the motel opened. His roomy eyes regarded us with disinterest as he handed over a key attached to a faded plastic fob. "Room 13, he croaked. "End of the row." I hesitated. 13, don't you have any other rooms available?" He shook his head slowly. 13's all we got. Take it or leave it." Sarah squeezed my hand. "It's fine, babe. We're not superstitious, remember? If only we'd been a little more superstitious. If only we'd listened to that nagging feeling and driven on to the next town. But we were tired, and the lure of a bed, any bed, was too strong to resist. Room 13 was about what you'd expect from a place like this. Faded wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and a bathroom that had last been cleaned when Reagan was in office. But it was a place to rest our heads, and that was all we needed. We fell asleep almost immediately, the exhaustion of the day catching up with us. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that things took a turn for the worse. I woke up needing to use the bathroom. In my groggy state, I stumbled towards the door, fumbling with the handle. It didn't budge. Still half asleep, I assumed I was just turning it wrong. I tried again, putting more force into it. Nothing. That's when the first inkling of unease crept in. I blinked, forcing myself to wake up fully. I examined the door handle, tried it again. It was definitely locked, but not from our side. We were locked in. "Sarah," I called, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Sarah, wake up." She stirred, mumbling something incoherent. "What is it?" "The door," I said. "I can't open it. I think we're locked in." That got her attention. She sat up, suddenly alert. "What do you mean, locked in?" I stepped aside, letting her try the door herself. She rattled the handle, then threw her shoulder against the wood. It didn't so much as creak. "This isn't funny," she said, her voice rising. "Let us out." But there was no response from outside. No sound at all. In fact, the silence was oppressive, broken only by our increasingly panicked breathing. We tried the windows next, but they were sealed shut. The glass was too thick to break without making a lot of noise, and even if we did, we were on the second floor. The fall would likely injure us too badly to escape. As the reality of our situation sank in, I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. We were trapped, with no way to call for help. Our phones had no signal. Of course they didn't, not out here in the middle of nowhere. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. I took a deep breath, trying to think rationally. "We wait," I said. "Someone will come to clean the room eventually, or maybe check us out. When they do, We'll be ready. But as the hours ticked by, no one came. We shouted ourselves hoarse, pounded on the walls until our hands were bruised. Nothing. It was as if the entire motel had been abandoned, leaving us as the only souls for miles around. The worst part was not knowing why. Were we simply victims of a cruel prank, or was there something more sinister at play? My mind conjured up horrible scenarios: human trafficking, organ harvesting, some sick game where people paid to watch others slowly lose their minds in captivity. As day turned to night again, our situation grew dire. We had no food, and the tap water tasted metallic and wrong. Thirst drove us to drink it anyway, but it left us feeling nauseous and lightheaded. Sarah broke down first. "We're going to die here," she sobbed, curled up on the bed. "No one knows where we are. No one's coming for us." I held her, murmuring reassurances I didn't believe. The truth was, she was right. We told no one about our detour, about staying at this godforsaken motel. For all anyone knew, we were still on our way to the wedding. As the second night wore on, I began to hallucinate. Shadows moved at the corners of my vision, and I could swear I heard voices whispering just beyond the walls. Was it the lack of food? The strange water? Or was I simply losing my mind? It was during one of these hallucinatory episodes that I noticed something odd about the ancient TV in the corner. It wasn't plugged in, hadn't been since we arrived, but I could have sworn I saw a flicker of static across its screen. Curious, desperate for any change in our circumstances, I approached it. As I drew closer, the static grew stronger, resolving into a grainy image. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was us, Sarah and I, asleep on the bed. But the angle was wrong, as if the camera was positioned in a corner of the ceiling. With a growing sense of horror, I looked up. There, almost invisible against the textured ceiling, was a tiny camera lens. "Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse, "we're being watched." She looked up from the bed, her eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. "What?" I pointed to the camera, then to the TV. Her eyes widened as she made the connection. "Oh God," she whispered. "What is this place?" Before I could respond, the TV screen changed. The image of our room was replaced by text, stark white against a black background. "Welcome to the game," it read. "You have 60 minutes to escape. Fail, and you forfeit your lives. Your time starts now." A timer appeared in the corner of the screen, counting down from 60 now. For a moment, we just stared, too shocked to move. Then survival instinct kicked in. We tore the room apart, looking for clues, for anything that might lead to our escape. We found cryptic messages hidden in the Bible, a key taped to the bottom of a drawer, a series of numbers scratched into the bathroom mirror that only appeared when fogged up. Each solved puzzle led to another, each solution bringing us closer to freedom, but the clock was ticking, and we were running out of time. With less than a minute left, we finally cracked the last code. The door swung open with an anticlimactic click, revealing an empty hallway beyond. We ran, not stopping until we reached our car. As we peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The motel stood silent and dark, giving no hint of the horrors it contained. We drove straight to the police, but when they investigated, they found nothing. The motel was abandoned, had been for years, they said. No cameras, no locked rooms, no evidence of the game we'd been forced to play. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'm back in that room. I'll check the corners for cameras, strain my ears for the sound of a ticking clock. Sarah and I don't talk about it much. Who would believe us? But we know what happened. We know what we survived. And we know that somewhere out there, in some nondescript motel off the beaten path, the game is waiting for its next unwitting players. So take my advice. Stick to the main roads, stay in chain hotels, and if you ever find yourself checking into room 13, turn around and drive away as fast as you can, because once the game begins, there's no guarantee you'll make it out alive. The moment his hand closed around my wrist, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. His smile, once friendly, now seemed predatory, and the pulsing lights of the festival faded into a sickening blur. As he led me away from the crowds, I realized with growing horror that my search for my friends had led me straight into a trap. It was supposed to be the best weekend of the summer. The Starlight Music Festival was legendary. 3 days of non-stop music, art, and celebration. My best friends and I had been planning this trip for months, saving every spare dollar and coordinating our outfits with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. We danced until our feet ached, sang along to our favorite bands until our voices grew hoarse, and reveled in the electric atmosphere that only a music festival can create. As night fell, the festival grounds transformed into a wonderland of neon lights and pulsating rhythms. It was during a set by our favorite DJ that it happened. One moment, I was dancing between Sarah and Mike, our arms linked as we swayed to the beat. The next, I turned around to find them gone, swallowed up by the surging crowd. At first, I wasn't worried. We'd gotten separated before and had always managed to find each other again. But as one song bled into another and there was still no sign of them, anxiety began to gnaw at my stomach. I pushed my way out of the crowd, scanning faces in the dim light. The festival grounds seemed to have grown impossibly large, a maze of stages, food vendors, and art installations. The press of bodies was overwhelming, the noise deafening. For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt small and very alone. That's when he appeared. Tall, with a kind face and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He seemed like a lifeline in the chaos. "You look lost," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the music. "Everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment, years of stranger danger warnings flashing through my mind. But he looked so normal, so concerned, and I was desperate for help. "I can't find my friends," and I shouted back. "We got separated during the last set." He nodded sympathetically. "That happens a lot here. I'm a volunteer," he added, pointing to a badge I hadn't noticed before. "I can help you find the lost and found tent. They might have gone there to look for you." Relief washed over me. Of course, the lost and found tent. Why hadn't I thought of that? "That would be great," I said. "Thank you so much." He smiled again, and this time I noticed how white his teeth were. How perfect. "No problem at all. It's this way. Follow me." I fell into step beside him as he led me away from the main stage area. The crowds began to thin out, the music fading to a distant thrum. I noticed we were heading towards the outskirts of the festival grounds, where the lighting was sparse and the revelry seemed far away. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, unease creeping back into my voice. "Shortcut," he said breezily. "It's just past these tents here." That's when he grabbed my wrist. His grip was like iron, his fingers digging into my skin. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. "Let go of me," I demanded, fear making my voice shrill. His smile widened, but there was no warmth in it now. Now why would I do that? "We're just getting to the fun part." I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that was swallowed up by the distant music and laughter. No one could hear me. No one was coming to help. He started dragging me towards a cluster of dark tents, his free hand clamped over my mouth. I fought with everything I had, kicking and clawing, but it was like fighting against a statue. He was too strong, too prepared. Just as we reached the tents, a voice rang out. "Hey, what's going on over there?" My attacker froze, his head whipping around to locate the source of the voice. It was all the distraction I needed. I bit down hard on the hand covering my mouth, tasting blood. He yelped in pain and his grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, my heart pounding in my ears, my lungs burning. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding on the packed earth, his curses growing fainter as I pulled ahead. I burst back into the main festival area, the sudden press of bodies both a relief and a new kind of terror. What if he was still behind me? What if he caught up to me in this crowd? Blind panic drove me forward. I pushed through the throng of dancers, ignoring their annoyed shouts and glares. I had to find security, had to find my friends, had to get away. I don't know how long I ran or how far. The festival had become a nightmare funhouse, every smiling face a potential threat, every shadowy corner hiding unseen dangers. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I found myself near the medical tent. A concerned-looking woman in a Red Cross vest approached me. "Are you all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." The story poured out of me in a rush, my words tumbling over each other in their haste to escape. The woman's face grew grave as she listened, and she quickly ushered me into the tent. What followed was a blur of police statements, medical checkups, and tearful reunions. Sarah and Mike had indeed gone to the lost and found tent, frantic with worry when they couldn't find me. The festival security launched a manhunt for my attacker, but in the chaos and darkness, he had vanished. They found others, though. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that I wasn't the only one who had been targeted. There were other stories, other close calls. My attacker had been part of a larger operation, preying on the lost and vulnerable in the festival crowd. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze. I couldn't bring myself to enjoy the music or the atmosphere, jumping at every sudden movement, every unexpected touch. The magic of the festival had been irreparably tarnished. In the months that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Nightmares plagued my sleep, and crowded places became a source of anxiety rather than excitement. I couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked around every corner, that the next friendly face might hide sinister intentions. Therapy helped, as did the unwavering support of my friends and family. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life, to find joy in the things I once loved. But I never forgot the lesson I learned that night at the Starlight Music Festival. Now, when I go to concerts or festivals, I'm always aware of my surroundings. I keep my friends close, never wander off alone, and trust my instincts when something feels off. Because I know firsthand how quickly a dream can turn into a nightmare, how easily predators can hide behind a mask of kindness. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice in my head. I see his too-perfect smile, feel the iron grip on my wrist. But then I remind myself that I survived. I got away, and in doing so, I helped expose a dangerous operation and potentially saved others from a similar fate. The Starlight Music Festival continues each year, but I've never gone back. The memories are too raw, too painful. But I hope that my story serves as a warning to others, to stay vigilant, to look out for one another, and to remember that even in the brightest of celebrations, darkness can lurk just out of sight. Because the truth is, the most dangerous predators aren't always hiding in the shadows. Sometimes, they're right there in plain sight, offering a helping hand and a friendly smile. And it's up to us to recognize the danger before it's too late. The first sign that something was terribly wrong was the eerie silence. The second was the half-eaten meals on the tables, as if the entire village had vanished mid-bite. By the time night fell and the shadows began to move, we realized our discovery of this abandoned hamlet was about to become a fight for survival. It was supposed to be a simple 3-day hike through the Appalachian wilderness. Just me and my 4 closest friends, Mike, Sarah, Alex, and Jess, getting away from the hustle of city life and reconnecting with nature. We'd done trips like this before, but nothing could have prepared us for what we stumbled upon on that fateful second day. The morning had started normally enough. We broke camp at dawn, the air crisp and fresh with the promise of adventure. As we hiked, we joked and shared stories, our laughter echoing through the dense forest. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that things took a turn. "Hey, guys," Mike called out, squinting at his GPS. "I think we might be off course." We gathered around him, peering at the small screen. According to the map, we should have been in the middle of uncharted forest. Instead, a clearing loomed ahead, barely visible through the trees. "Maybe it's just not on the map," Sarah suggested. "Could be an old logging camp or something." Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. As we emerged from the tree line, what we saw made us stop in our tracks. It wasn't a logging camp, it was a village. Nestled in the heart of the forest was a cluster of buildings that looked like they belonged to another century. Wooden cabins with thatched roofs lined dirt paths, and in the center stood what appeared to be a town square, complete with a well and a small chapel. "This is impossible," Alex breathed, voicing what we were all thinking. "How is this not on any map?" We approached cautiously, calling out greetings, but no one answered. The village was eerily silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. As we explored, the sense of wrongness grew. Everything looked lived in, as if the inhabitants had just stepped out moments ago. Laundry still hung on lines, swaying gently. Gardens were well tended, vegetables ripe on the vine, but there wasn't a soul in sight. "Guys," Jess called from one of the cabins, "you need to see this." We crowded into the small dwelling and saw what had caught her attention. The table was set for dinner, plates filled with now moldy food. Chairs were pushed back haphazardly, as if the diners had left in a hurry. "What the hell happened here?" I murmured, a chill running down my spine despite the warm afternoon sun. We split up to search the rest of the village, agreeing to meet back in the square in an hour. As I explored, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone standing there, but the village remained deserted. In one cabin, I found a diary. The last entry was dated just a week ago. It spoke of strange noises in the night, of livestock going missing, of an overwhelming sense of dread. The final words sent a shiver through me. "They're coming. God help us all." When we regrouped, everyone had similar stories. Alex had found more half-eaten meals. Sarah discovered a schoolhouse with lessons still written on the blackboard. Mike had explored the chapel and found it set up for a service that never happened. "We need to leave," Jess said, her voice shaking slightly. "Something bad happened here, and I don't think we want to be around when night falls." But as we turned to go, we realized with growing horror that the sun was already setting. Somehow, hours had passed without us noticing. The forest beyond the village had grown dark and forbidding. "We can't go stumbling through the woods at night," Mike argued. "We'll break our necks." "So what? We stay here," Alex countered, gesturing at the empty village. "In this creepy ghost town." In the end, we didn't have much choice. We chose a cabin near the edge of the village, one with a clear view of the path back to the forest. We barricaded the door and windows as best we could, then settled in for an uneasy night. No one slept. We sat in a tight circle, flashlights at the ready, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. As the hours crawled by, the silence of the village grew oppressive. It was just past midnight when we heard it, a sound so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it. But then it came again, a soft shuffling, like something being dragged across the ground. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. We all nodded, too scared to speak. The sound was getting closer, coming from the direction of the village square, and it wasn't alone. Other noises joined it, a low moan, the clatter of something heavy falling, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Lots of footsteps. Jess was the first to peek through a crack in the barricaded window. She recoiled almost immediately, her face pale in the dim light of our flashlights. "Oh God," she breathed. They're people, but not people. Something's wrong with them." One by one, we looked. What we saw defied explanation. Figures moved through the village square, their movements jerky and unnatural. In the moonlight, their skin looked gray and mottled. Some were missing limbs, others had gaping wounds that should have been fatal, but they moved with purpose, searching. "Zombies," Alex whispered incredulously. "Are we seriously dealing with zombies right now?" But we all knew that wasn't quite right. These weren't the mindless, shambling corpses of movies. These things moved with an unsettling coordination, as if guided by some unseen intelligence. As we watched, frozen in horror, one of the creatures paused. It turned slowly, its head swiveling until it was facing directly at our cabin. A sound emerged from its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a word, but it was a call. And the others answered. "We need to go," I said, already moving to unbarricade the door. "Now!" We burst out of the cabin just as the first of the creatures reached it. The cool night air was filled with their moans, the sound chilling me to my core. We ran, not towards the forest path, but deeper into the village. It was our only chance, to lose them in the maze of buildings and find another way out. What followed was a nightmare of narrow escapes and heart-stopping terror. We darted from shadow to shadow, always just one step ahead of our pursuers. At one point, we got separated. I found myself alone in what looked like a workshop, the sound of those things scratching at the door. I was certain I was going to die there, torn apart by whatever these creatures were. But then I heard Mike's voice, calling my name. Somehow, I found the strength to break a window and climb out, reuniting with my friends just in time to flee from another group of the monsters. As dawn broke, we finally found our way back to the forest path. The creatures seemed unable or unwilling to follow us past the village boundary. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, collapsing in a clearing far from that accursed place. We made it back to civilization, but our story was met with disbelief. When authorities finally investigated, they found no trace of the village. It was as if it had never existed. But in my nightmares, I still hear those moans, still see those grasping hands reaching for me. We never went hiking again after that. How could we, knowing what might be lurking in the untamed wilderness? Sometimes, late at night, I find myself wondering about that village. Where did it come from? What happened to its people? And most chillingly, is it still out there, waiting for more unsuspecting travelers to stumble upon its cursed grounds? I don't have answers, but I know one thing for certain. Some places are meant to remain undiscovered, and some mysteries are better left unsolved, because in the depths of the forest, in the shadows of forgotten places, there are horrors beyond imagination, and once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. You can only hope to survive. The moment the lock clicked shut behind us, I knew we were in trouble. The house, once inviting, now felt like a trap. As darkness fell and strange noises echoed through the empty rooms, we realized that what should have been a routine property showing had become a fight for survival. My name's Emma, and I've been a real estate agent for nearly a decade. I've seen my fair share of unusual properties, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day. It was supposed to be a simple showing of a Victorian-era mansion on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that usually excites history buffs and restoration enthusiasts. My clients, the Johnsons, were a lovely couple in their mid-30s, looking for their forever home. They'd fallen in love with the photos online and were eager to see the place in person. I'd visited the property once before to get the keys and do a quick walkthrough, but something about it had unsettled me. I chalked it up to the usual creepiness of old, empty houses, and thought nothing more of it. We arrived at the mansion just as the sun was starting to set. The fading light cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, making the house look more imposing than I remembered. "Oh, it's perfect," Mrs. Johnson exclaimed as we walked up the creaking porch steps, just like something out of a Gothic novel. If only we'd known how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The interior of the house was impressive, if a bit musty. High ceilings, intricate woodwork, and huge windows that would let in plenty of light during the day. But as we moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "And this," I said, pushing open a heavy oak door, "is the master bedroom." As we stepped inside, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind us. We all jumped, then laughed nervously. Old houses, you know, Mr. Johnson said with a forced chuckle, always full of surprises. We continued the tour, making our way up to the third floor. That's when things started to get weird. As we entered what looked like an old study, the temperature dropped noticeably. Mrs. Johnson shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Is there a draft in here?" she asked. Before I could answer, we heard it. A low, mournful sound, like someone crying. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What was that?" Mr. Johnson asked, his voice tight with tension. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. These old houses make all sorts of noises. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the wind. It sounded too human. We decided to cut the tour short and head back downstairs. That's when we realized we were trapped. Every door we tried was locked, including the front door we'd come in through. Even the windows wouldn't budge. "This isn't funny, Emma," Mrs. Johnson said, panic edging into her voice. "Let us out." "I'm not doing this," I insisted, my own fear rising. "I don't know what's happening." As if in response, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Mrs. Johnson screamed, and I felt Mr. Johnson grab my arm. "We need to find a way out," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "There has to be a key or something." We used our phone flashlights to search the house, looking for anything that might help us escape. But as we moved from room to room, it became clear that we weren't alone. Shadows moved at the edge of our vision, disappearing when we turned to look. That crying sound grew louder, sometimes right behind us, sometimes far away. In the kitchen, we found an old rotary phone. To our surprise, it had a dial tone. I quickly dialed 911, hope surging through me. "911, what's your emergency?" a calm voice answered. "Please, we're trapped in a house at 1313 Oakwood Lane," I said in a rush. "The doors are locked. We can't get out. There's something here with us." There was a pause. Then the operator spoke again. But it wasn't the same voice. This one was deep, distorted, barely human. "No one's coming to help you," it growled. "You belong to the house now." The line went dead. We stared at each other in horror, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were on our own. As the night wore on, the house seemed to come alive around us. Doors slammed on their own. Objects moved when we weren't looking. And always, that crying sound, sometimes turning into screams that made our blood run cold. We huddled together in the living room, too scared to separate. Mrs. Johnson was praying quietly, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Johnson kept trying to break a window with a fireplace poker, but the glass wouldn't even crack. Around midnight, things escalated. A chair flew across the room, narrowly missing Mr. Johnson's head. Books launched themselves off shelves, and then we saw it, a figure, translucent and glowing faintly, hovering at the top of the stairs. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Her face was twisted in a mask of sorrow and rage. When she spoke, it was the same distorted voice we'd heard on the phone. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "No one ever leaves." She floated down the stairs, other ghostly figures emerging from the walls to join her. They surrounded us, their cold presence making it hard to breathe. In that moment, I remembered something I'd read in the property history but had dismissed as local legend. The house had once belonged to a wealthy family in the 1800s. The daughter had fallen in love with a man her parents didn't approve of. They'd locked her in the attic until she agreed to marry someone else. Instead, she'd taken her own life. "I'm sorry," I said, addressing the ghost directly. "What happened to you was terrible, but we're not the ones who hurt you. Please, let us go." The ghost paused, her form flickering. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of humanity in her eyes. "It's too late," she whispered. "We're all trapped here, forever." But something had changed. The other ghosts were retreating, fading into the walls. The main ghost, the daughter, I realized, remained. "There is a way," she said, her voice sounding more human now. In the attic, my room, find what was taken from me. With that, she vanished. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, and we heard a click. The attic door had unlocked. We raced up the stairs, hope giving us new energy. The attic was dusty and cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes. In the corner was a small room, more of a cell, really, and there, on a decaying vanity, we saw it, a locket, tarnished with age. As soon as Mrs. Johnson picked it up, the house shuddered. We heard a sound like 1,000 voices sighing in relief. The front door swung open, and the first light of dawn spilled into the hallway. We didn't hesitate. We ran out of that house as fast as our legs could carry us, not stopping until we reached my car. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw the ghost girl standing on the porch, smiling. Then she was gone, and the house was just a house again. We never spoke publicly about what happened that night. Who would believe us? The police report simply stated that we'd been accidentally locked in due to a faulty mechanism. The house was eventually torn down, the land turned into a park. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that crying sound in my dreams. And I wonder about the ghost girl and all the others trapped in that house. Did we really free them? Or are they still there, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitors to walk through the door? I don't show old houses anymore. The risk is too great, because now I know that some properties come with a history that can't be seen in photos or disclosed in paperwork. Some houses are more than just buildings. They're prisons for lost souls, waiting for a chance to escape or to pull others in to share their eternal torment. So if you're ever house hunting and you come across a place that seems too good to be true, a beautiful old mansion with a surprisingly low price tag, think twice before you step inside, because you never know what might be waiting for you. And once those doors lock behind you, there's no guarantee you'll ever come out again. The first impact jolted us out of our casual conversation. The second sent us skidding towards the ditch. By the third, as our car rolled off the road, I knew this was no accident. Someone wanted us off this lonely stretch of highway, and they didn't care if we survived the fall. It was supposed to be a fun family road trip. My wife, Lisa, our 2 kids, Emma, 10, and Jack, 8, and I had been planning this vacation for months. We'd mapped out a route through some of the most beautiful parts of the country, with plenty of stops at quirky roadside attractions to keep the kids entertained. We'd been on the road for 3 days, and everything had been going great. The kids were getting along better than usual, probably thanks to the excitement of the trip. Lisa and I were enjoying the chance to spend some uninterrupted time together, sharing the driving and rediscovering why we'd fallen in love in the first place. That fateful evening, we were on a lonely stretch of highway cutting through dense forest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I was behind the wheel, with Lisa dozing in the passenger seat. The kids were in the back, Emma reading a book and Jack playing on his handheld game. I first noticed the car in my rearview mirror about an hour before sunset. It was a dark sedan, nondescript except for how fast it was approaching. I moved over to let it pass, but it just stayed behind us, uncomfortably close. "That guy's riding our tail," I said to Lisa, who had woken up and was stretching. She glanced back and frowned. "Maybe he's in a hurry. There's a rest stop coming up in a few miles. We can pull over and let him pass." I nodded, keeping an eye on the car behind us. But as we approached the rest stop, the car suddenly accelerated, swerving into the oncoming lane and pulling up beside us. That's when the first impact came. The sedan slammed into our side, the sound of crunching metal filling the air. The kids screamed in the back seat as I fought to keep control of the car. "What the hell?" I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. "Is he crazy?" Before Lisa could respond, the car hit us again, harder this time. We skidded towards the edge of the road, tires squealing as I desperately tried to steer us back on course. The third hit sent us over the edge. The world spun as our car rolled down the embankment. I heard the crunch of metal, the shattering of glass, the terrified screams of my family. Then everything went black. I came to hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. The car was on its roof, the windshield shattered. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Emma crying. "Lisa," I croaked, turning my head. My wife was next to me, unconscious but breathing. "Emma? Jack? Daddy?" Emma's voice came from the back, shaky and scared. "I'm okay, but Jack won't wake up." Fear gripped my heart. I fumbled with my seatbelt, falling awkwardly as it released. Ignoring the pain shooting through my body, I twisted around to check on the kids. Emma was already unbuckled, a cut on her forehead but otherwise seeming okay. Jack was slumped in his seat, a nasty bruise forming on his temple, but he was breathing, and when I checked, his pulse was strong. "We need to get out of here," I said more to myself than to Emma. "Can you unbuckle Jack while I help Mommy?" Emma nodded bravely, her hands shaking as she reached for her brother's seatbelt. I turned back to Lisa, gently shaking her. "Lisa, honey, wake up. We need to move." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion quickly turning to fear as she took in our situation. "The kids?" she asked immediately. "They're okay," I assured her, "but we need to get out of the car. That guy might come back." As if on cue, we heard the sound of a car engine approaching. Panic surged through me. I helped Lisa with her seatbelt, then turned to help Emma with Jack. Together, we managed to drag ourselves out of the wreckage. We were at the bottom of a steep embankment, the forest dark and imposing around us. Up on the road, I could see headlights approaching slowly. "Into the trees," I whispered urgently. "We need to hide." Lisa took Emma's hand while I carried Jack, who was starting to stir. We stumbled into the forest, the undergrowth scratching at our legs as we pushed through. Behind us, I heard a car door slam, then footsteps crunching on gravel. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, one sweeping over our wrecked car. "I know you're out there," a man's voice called out, sounding almost gleeful. "Come on out and make this easy on yourselves." We pressed ourselves against a large tree, hardly daring to breathe. Jack had woken up fully now, and I could feel him trembling in my arms. I put a finger to my lips, silently urging him to stay quiet. The flashlight beam came closer, sweeping back and forth through the trees. I could hear the man muttering to himself, leaves crunching under his feet as he searched. "Found your phone?" he called out. "No service out here. No one's coming to help you." My heart sank. He was right. We were miles from the nearest town, with no way to call for help. We were on our own. The sound of his footsteps faded as he moved further into the forest. I turned to Lisa, speaking in a whisper. "We need to move. Head deeper into the forest. Try to circle back to the road further down." She nodded, her face pale in the moonlight. We set off as quietly as we could, every snapping twig sounding like a gunshot in the silent forest. We walked for what felt like hours, the kids growing tired and scared. Jack was able to walk on his own now, but he clung to my hand like a lifeline. Emma was being incredibly brave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Just when I thought we might have lost our pursuer, we heard it, the rev of an engine, closer than it should have been. Headlights cut through the trees ahead of us. "He's on a road," Lisa gasped. "He's trying to cut us off." We changed direction, pushing through denser undergrowth. The sound of the engine faded, then grew loud again as he turned onto another road. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with us as the mice. Every time we thought we were making progress, the sound of that engine would reach us, forcing us to change course. As dawn began to break, we finally stumbled onto a paved road. But it wasn't the highway we'd been driven off. This was a smaller, local road. "Look!" Emma pointed down the road. In the distance, we could see buildings, a small town. Hope surged through us, giving us a second wind. We started down the road, moving as fast as our exhausted bodies would allow. That's when we heard it, the now familiar sound of an engine approaching. Headlights appeared around a bend behind us. "Run!" I shouted, all pretense of stealth abandoned. We ran, the kids finding energy they didn't know they had. The car behind us accelerated, closing the distance rapidly. Just as I thought it was over, that we'd come so far only to be caught at the last moment, another set of headlights appeared ahead of us. A police cruiser rounded the corner, its lights flashing as it sped towards us. The car behind us screeched to a halt, then reversed quickly, disappearing back the way it had come. The police car pulled up beside us, the officer inside looking at us with concern. "Are you folks all right?" he asked, taking in our battered, exhausted appearance. The story poured out of us in a rush. The officer called for backup and an ambulance, assuring us that we were safe now. In the days that followed, as we recovered in the hospital and gave statements to the police, we learned the full story. Our attacker was a serial killer who had been targeting families on remote highways for years. Thanks to our escape and description, they were able to track him down and arrest him. We never did finish that road trip. But we did gain a new appreciation for life, for family, and for the strength we all had inside us. Now, when we travel, we stick to busier roads and well-populated areas. And we always keep an eye on the rearview mirror, watching for cars that get too close. Because we learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones hiding in the forest. Sometimes they're right there on the road with you, just waiting for the right moment to strike. The first anonymous note was easy to dismiss as a prank. The second made my stomach churn with unease. By the third, as I stared at the words, "Keep quiet, or else," I knew that my discovery at the disaster relief site had put my life in danger. What had started as a simple volunteer effort had turned into a nightmare of corruption and threats, and I was in way over my head. My name is Alex, and I never thought I'd find myself in the middle of a conspiracy. I'm just an ordinary guy who wanted to help out after a devastating hurricane hit our coast. The destruction was heart-wrenching. Homes reduced to splinters, entire communities underwater, and thousands of people displaced. When the call went out for volunteers, I didn't hesitate to sign up. The relief center was a hive of activity from the moment I arrived. Trucks loaded with supplies rolled in constantly, and a small army of volunteers worked tirelessly to sort and distribute food, water, and other essentials. I threw myself into the work, grateful for the chance to make a difference. It was during my second week that I first noticed something odd. I was helping to unload a truck of bottled water when I overheard two of the site managers arguing in hushed tones. "The numbers don't add up," one of them hissed. "We're short almost a third of what was supposed to be here." The other man grabbed his arm, eyes darting around nervously. "Keep your voice down. We'll deal with it later." They noticed me then and quickly separated, plastering on fake smiles. I pretended I hadn't heard anything, but the exchange stuck with me. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I noticed discrepancies between the supplies that were logged as received and what actually made it to the distribution area. Boxes of expensive medical supplies would arrive, only to disappear before they could be handed out. Even some of the monetary donations seemed to be vanishing into thin air. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe I was misunderstanding something about how relief efforts worked. But the more I saw, the more certain I became that something was very wrong. I decided to do some digging. Late one night, after most of the other volunteers had left, I snuck into the main office. What I found there made my blood run cold. Hidden behind a false panel in one of the filing cabinets was a ledger. It detailed hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of supplies and cash that had been diverted, stolen, from the relief efforts. My hands shook as I took photos of the ledger with my phone. I knew I had to report this, but to whom? The local authorities were stretched thin dealing with the aftermath of the hurricane. And what if they were in on it too? I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't hear the footsteps approaching. I barely had time to replace the ledger and duck out of sight before the door opened. Through a crack in the cabinet I was hiding in, I saw two men enter, the site manager and someone I didn't recognize, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the relief center. "The boss isn't happy," suit guy said, his voice cold. "We're not meeting our quotas." The site manager wrung his hands nervously. "It's getting harder to hide the shortages. Some of the volunteers are asking questions." "Then get rid of them," suit guy snapped. "We can't afford any loose ends." They left shortly after, but I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear it. When I finally crept out of the office and back to my quarters, my mind was reeling. This was bigger than I had imagined, and far more dangerous. The next morning, I found the first note tucked under my door. "We know what you saw. Stay quiet and walk away." I crumpled it up, telling myself it was just a coincidence, a prank by one of the other volunteers. But then came the second note, this one pinned to my pillow. "Last warning. Forget what you found or suffer the consequences." The threat was clear, and fear coiled in my gut. They knew. Somehow, they knew I had been in that office. I wanted to leave, to run as far from this place as I could. But how could I abandon the people who genuinely needed help? And how could I live with myself if I let these criminals continue to steal from those who had already lost so much? I decided to gather more evidence. Using my phone, I secretly recorded conversations, took photos of suspicious shipments, and made copies of incriminating documents. All the while, I felt eyes on me, watching my every move. The third note appeared in my bag during lunch. "Keep quiet or else." This time, it was accompanied by a photo of my family back home. The message was clear. They could get to me, and they could get to those I loved. That night, as I lay awake wrestling with what to do, I heard a commotion outside. Peering out my window, I saw several men loading boxes into an unmarked van. I recognized those boxes. They were supposed to contain vital medications for a nearby shelter. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and started recording. I had to get proof, something concrete I could take to the authorities. I crept outside, using the shadows for cover as I tried to get a clearer shot. I was so focused on the men at the van that I didn't notice someone approaching from behind until it was too late. A hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my startled cry. "You should have listened to the warnings," a voice growled in my ear. I was dragged away from the scene, my heart racing as I realized this might be the end. They took me to a secluded area behind one of the storage tents. 3 men surrounded me, the site manager, suit guy from the office, and a burly man I'd seen working security. "We gave you every chance to walk away," suit guy said, his tone almost conversational. "But you just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" "People are suffering," I spat back, finding a courage I didn't know I had. "You're stealing from those who have nothing left." The site manager at least had the decency to look ashamed, but suit guy just laughed. "It's business, kid, nothing personal. But now, well, now it is personal." He nodded to the security guy, who cracked his knuckles ominously. I closed my eyes, bracing for the blow, but it never came. Instead, I heard shouts and the sound of running feet. I opened my eyes to see a group of people rushing towards us. Other volunteers, led by Sarah, one of the team leaders I'd grown close to over the past weeks. "Alex, are you okay?" Sarah called out as she reached us. She turned to suit guy, her eyes blazing. "We heard everything. It's over. The police are on their way." It turned out I wasn't the only one who had noticed something was wrong. Sarah and a few others had been conducting their own investigation. When they saw me being dragged away, they followed, recording everything on their phones. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and media cameras. The scale of the corruption was staggering. Millions of dollars worth of aid had been stolen, not just from our site, but from relief efforts all along the coast. In the days that followed, as the story broke nationwide, I struggled with a mix of emotions. Relief that the truth was out, guilt that I hadn't acted sooner, fear of retaliation. But mostly, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I stayed on at the relief center, helping to rebuild not just the community but also the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. Many people were angry, feeling betrayed by those who were supposed to help them. But slowly, as legitimate aid began flowing in and real progress was made, hope began to return. I learned a lot from this experience, about the depths of human greed, yes, but also about the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's scary. About the importance of trusting your instincts and not being afraid to ask questions, and about the incredible impact a group of dedicated people can have when they work together for a common cause. Sometimes, late at night, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure or find another threatening note. The fear may never fully go away, but I know I did the right thing. And if I had to do it all over again, even knowing the danger, I wouldn't change a thing. Because in the face of disaster, whether it's a natural catastrophe or human corruption, staying silent is never the answer. It's up to each of us to speak up, to fight for what's right, and to help those in need. That's the real essence of disaster relief, and it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The first twig snap could have been a deer. The second might have been the wind. But when I heard the third, followed by heavy breathing just outside our cabin window, I knew with chilling certainty that our weekend getaway had become a fight for survival. It was supposed to be a fun, relaxing trip. My best friend Jake had found an amazing deal on a remote cabin rental, nestled deep in the mountains. Just what we need, he'd said. A break from the city. No cell phones, no internet, just nature and good company. Our group of 5, Jake, his girlfriend Sarah, our friends Mike and Lisa, and myself, had jumped at the chance. The drive up was beautiful, winding mountain roads framed by towering pines and breathtaking vistas. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small clearing where the cabin stood. It was rustic but charming, with a wide porch and large windows that promised amazing views come morning. We spent that first evening settling in, unpacking our supplies and exploring the cabin. There were 3 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen stocked with all the basics. After a simple dinner of pasta and wine, we gathered around the fire pit outside, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories under a canopy of stars. It wasn't until we were heading to bed that I first felt a twinge of unease. As I was closing the curtains in my room, I could have sworn I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. A shadow, darker than the surrounding night, that seemed to shift and disappear as soon as I focused on it. I shook it off as imagination, fueled by one too many ghost stories around the fire. The next day dawned bright and clear. We spent it hiking the nearby trails, marveling at waterfalls and hidden meadows bursting with wildflowers. By the time we returned to the cabin, we were pleasantly exhausted and looking forward to another quiet evening. That's when things started to feel off. Small things at first. A chair on the porch that wasn't where we'd left it. A window we were sure we'd closed found wide open. Our firewood pile, neatly stacked that morning, now scattered as if something had crashed through it. Probably just animals, Mike said with a shrug. Bears, maybe. We all nodded, eager to accept this rational explanation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As night fell, the feeling intensified. We were in the living room, playing a board game by firelight, when the first twig snapped outside. We all froze, looking at each other with nervous smiles. Just the wind, Sarah said, but her voice trembled slightly. A few minutes later, another snap, closer this time. Jake got up to look out the window, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. "Hey, I don't see anything," he said. But he double-checked the lock on the door as he sat back down. We tried to return to our game, but the mood had shifted. Every creak of the cabin's old wood, every gust of wind outside, sent shivers down my spine. That's when we heard it. Heavy breathing, just outside the living room window. It was too loud, too close, to be anything but intentional. Lisa screamed, dropping her wine glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence that followed. For a long moment, we all sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. Then, slowly, deliberately, something started scratching at the window. "We need to get out of here," I whispered urgently. Mike shook his head. "The car's on the other side of the clearing. We'd never make it." He was right. Whatever was out there, it was between us and our only means of escape. "The bedrooms," Sarah suggested, her voice shaking. "We can barricade ourselves in." It seemed like our only option. We moved as quietly as we could, grabbing anything that might serve as a weapon: fireplace pokers, heavy flashlights, a kitchen knife. We chose the largest bedroom, pushing a heavy dresser in front of the door once we were all inside. "What do they want?" Lisa asked, tears streaming down her face. Nobody had an answer. We huddled together in the center of the room, listening to the sounds of movement outside. Footsteps on the porch, the creak of floorboards in the living room. They were inside the cabin now. Hours passed like this, each sound from beyond our barricaded door sending fresh waves of terror through us. We took turns watching, trying to stay alert despite our exhaustion. It was during my watch, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, that I heard it, a new sound, different from the others, a rhythmic thumping, growing louder. "Guys," I hissed, shaking the others awake. "Listen." As we strained our ears, the sound resolved into something recognizable: helicopter blades. Hope surged through me. Someone had found us. We were saved. But our elation was short-lived. From just outside our door came an animalistic growl, followed by the splintering of wood. Whatever was out there knew its time was running out, and it was making one last, desperate attempt to get to us. The dresser shuddered as something heavy slammed into the door. We pressed ourselves against the far wall, weapons raised, ready for a final stand. The door burst open with a crash, the dresser toppling over. And there, framed in the doorway, was a figure that defied explanation. It was human in shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over protruding bones. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, noseless, with sunken cheeks and eyes that glowed with an unholy, hungry light. For a heartbeat, we all stared at each other in horrified silence. Then the creature let out an unearthly shriek and lunged towards us. What happened next was chaos. We fought with a desperation born of sheer terror. I swung the fireplace poker wildly, feeling it connect with something solid. Sarah and Lisa were screaming. Jake had tackled the thing, wrestling with it on the floor. And then, suddenly, it was over. A deafening explosion filled the room as Mike fired the flare gun we'd found in the emergency kit. The creature howled in pain, its skin smoldering where the flare had struck it. It scrambled backwards, out the door and down the hall. We heard the sound of breaking glass, and then silence. We didn't dare move until we heard voices outside, human voices, calling out. Park rangers, drawn by the helicopter we'd heard earlier. Apparently, the cabin's owners had called them when we failed to check out on time. The rangers found us huddled in the bedroom, wild-eyed and babbling about monsters in the woods. They were skeptical at first, but the state of the cabin, the broken windows, the claw marks on the walls, was hard to explain away. A search of the surrounding forest turned up nothing, save for some strange tracks leading deep into the mountains. The official report blamed our experience on a bear attack, fueled by group hysteria and too much alcohol. But we knew the truth. In the years that followed, we researched obsessively, trying to make sense of what we'd encountered. We found old legends of mountain demons, stories of hikers gone missing in those same woods. Nothing concrete, but enough to convince us that we weren't crazy. We never went back to those mountains. How could we, knowing what lurked in their shadowy depths? But sometimes, on dark nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself thinking about that cabin, about the creature with the glowing eyes and hungry smile. And I wonder, is it still out there, waiting in the darkness, watching, hungry, for the next group of unsuspecting vacationers to stumble into its territory? I hope not, but I keep my doors locked, just in case. Because I know now that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in our imaginations. Sometimes they're all too real, hiding just beyond the reach of our campfire's light, waiting for their chance to strike. So if you're ever planning a trip to a remote cabin in the woods, remember our story. Keep your eyes open, your wits about you, and maybe, just maybe, bring a flare gun. Because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting for its chance to pass.